Hello everyone. Today we'll be bringing you a review of the Pilot Plumix fountain pen medium nib. So, Pilot advertises this pen as classic writing with a modern twist. It has an advanced ink feed system for smooth writing, and as you can see here, take the barrel off. Here's the ink cartridge. Basically what this does is you can see the ink come from the cartridge down into the fin system here, which then feeds the ink into the nib. So obviously this pen is refillable. It takes these cartridges here, which you just kind of stick right in, and then it feeds the ink down into the fins from there. It's Pilot's IC100 ink refills. The pen does utilize a flat edge tip on the nib, which makes it ideal for calligraphy. So if you're a beginner with fountain pens or calligraphy, this is really a great pen to get. I don't know how well you're going to be able to actually see on this video, but as opposed to other fountain pens, which are not specific in being used for calligraphy, they'll have sort of just a rounded nib, whereas this one has a flat edge on the tip of the nib. The barrel of this pen is made of this tinted plastic here. So you can see through somewhat to see the ink supply. You'd have to look a little closer, kind of hold it up to the light to be able to tell if you weren't really looking. It wouldn't be necessarily evident right away, but you can see through. And in the grip area here, the plastic is completely clear, so it's easy to spot when you're running very low on ink. The grip itself is essentially just these two concave indentations in the plastic for your thumb and index finger to fit into. While there's no actual comfort grip material on this pen, I did find it to be reasonably comfortable. I also found the placement of these indentations to be extremely useful, particularly if you don't have much experience or a lot of time using fountain pens, which I definitely don't. The reason being, if you're not familiar with fountain pens, you may not know the correct way to hold the nib relative to the paper, which is right about like this. So this metal side here should be facing up, this should be facing down like that. So if you hold it any other way, it's not going to write. So with this pen, essentially you have to hold it correctly thanks to the design of the grip, so I found this very useful, and another reason why if you're a beginner with fountain pens, this is a great pen to use, because it sort of forces you to use it right. The pen just has this small cap, no clip on it, although I wouldn't really recommend for carrying the pen around in your pocket anyway. It's a screw-on cap, which is interesting. And there are these two kind of small wings or fins, or whatever you want to call them, on the cap, which do make screwing it on and off much easier, as opposed to if it didn't have those. So, without further ado, let's take a look at how it writes. The clip actually does stay right on the back here though, no screws, you just press it in. So we'll take a look at how it writes. You can see right away just from doing a little bit of printing, it has that style very reminiscent of calligraphy writing, whereas some parts, as you're writing around a curve, have thicker lines and then it goes into thinner lines. Writes very smooth. Really just glides along the paper. Feels reasonably comfortable. Despite the fact that there's no kind of foam or rubber comfort on the grip, it does, your hand kind of really contours to it pretty well, and your fingers really fit in there quite nicely. So as you can see, even if you're like me and really don't have any kind of artistic ability, definitely don't know how to do calligraphy, anything like that, this pen, writing with it can really make your printing or handwriting kind of look a lot better. It makes it, definitely gives it some character, gives sort of an italic style to it, and that is of course due to the flat edge tip on the nib, so which used for calligraphy. So even just using this for something that you're just printing regular, say you were filling out a card or an invitation or something, even if you don't actually know how to do calligraphy, know how to write in any kind of italic handwriting or anything like that, just printing or writing in this pen as you normally would using this pen will make it look a lot nicer and kind of, give it sort of a kind of fancy look, if you want to call it that. I like the quality of the lines produced on the paper as well. They're crisp, pretty much skip free, no blobbing. And aside from the characteristics produced from the flat edge tip on the nib, the ink itself it does look very good. See how it performs with a smear test. 1 second. A little bit, not too much. 2, 3, 4, and 5. So, as you can see, performed very, very well on the smear test. We got a little bit of smearing in 1 second. After that, essentially nothing. Maybe very, very, very trace amounts of smearing at 2 seconds, and then from 3 on, essentially none. So it's pretty close to a perfect smear test. Let's see how it did with some writing we did prior. We'll notice much of the same. Produces lines that are, very consistent, very skip-free, blob-free. And then again, it also really gives anything you're writing, even if you're not trying to, very kind of artistic and classic feel to the writing by, like I said, courtesy of that of the flat, the edge tip, if you want to call it, on the nib, which allows your lines to be thicker at some points and then thinner at other points around the curve. Smear test, much of the same. I think on this one we got essentially no smearing all across the board, maybe very, very, very minimal at 1 second. From 2 on, essentially none. One thing I'd like to point out with this pen, it really lets you see the difference between a flat edge nib, which this pen has, as compared to a fountain pen that's kind of not geared as much toward calligraphy, with a regular rounded nib tip. So when we look at something, say, like the Pilot Varsity disposable fountain pen, the Varsity does have a rounded nib tip, which is essentially, just a point. So it delivers more normal writing, you'd say, that you'd find like something like a standard rollerball pen. So the main difference is with the flat edge nib tip, you're going to get lines which vary in their width as you're writing around curves and things like that. With a rounded nib point, you're going to get basically just lines that are consistent in their thickness. So it's going to look more like a regular like a regular pen would write. So after looking at the Plumix, especially compared to the Varsity, I would definitely recommend the Plumix for any type of calligraphy needs. The Varsity still can be used for some types of semi-formal writing, such as italic handwriting, things like that. But I learned something by reviewing this pen today too, that kind of what's better for calligraphy writing, and I would absolutely say if you're trying to get into it, the Varsity, while being a good pen, and if you just want something as a fountain pen to write with occasionally, I would still say the Varsity is a good choice. But if you're geared specifically towards calligraphy and that's what you want to get into, absolutely choose the Plumix. That being said, I really wouldn't recommend either for a general everyday writing, just as, if you were taking notes, writing checks, things, nothing like that. But that's in large part my personal preference. I definitely wouldn't recommend it for, like I said, checks and things. Sometimes you can. I know with the Varsity I got ink that kind of ran a little bit. So it's my opinion that that would not be best for this. I did a little comparison here between the Plumix in the blue and the Varsity in the black. And as you can see, it really accentuates the differences between the flat edge and the rounded point. So you can see, like, as we're writing a curve, it gets thicker towards the bottom and then thins out towards the top when we use the Plumix. And then with the Varsity, it just is consistent width all the way through. So overall, this is a really good low-cost fountain pen. Is refillable, so you don't have to worry about buying new ones. It's a great way to get into just using a fountain pen, or to get into calligraphy if you're a beginner and you're interested in either of those two subjects. So if that's what you're looking for, I would highly recommend this pen. It performs very well and is very reasonable in its price. That's about it. Thanks for watching.